You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hello, it's Holly here, popping into your ears to let you know about my brand new podcast, Mid. It's a show full of conversations for Gen X women. I really wanted to make it because I wanted to listen to the kind of conversations that I love to have. Meaningful ones, silly ones, life-changing ones, life-affirming ones. Please enjoy this episode of Mid, the show for women who are anything but. And for more, please follow the links in the show notes. Just not feeling it at the moment. Completely touched out. Don't care if it never happens again. Libido snatching hormones. There's no space left for me to focus on pleasure. The literal acts seem ridiculous, comical, silly somehow. Now we're all so different. There can be a lot of sadness around sex when you ask mid-women about it, really ask them about it. Because sex can be all caught up in who you are, who you were, and how you feel about how desirable this new you is. Maybe you used to love sex. Maybe you can remember being that person. You can feel her, that charge rippling across her skin, that tremble, that wave of intense need, that flood of warm, syrupy relief. That smile that can't be wiped, the memory of fingerprints on your skin you carry through your day and never want to fade. Maybe you've decided she was someone else, that person. Because now she seems to have dissolved away in a soup of hormones, caring and exhaustion that's been on a low boil of resentment in a faded relationship. Maybe you've never been more aware of the gap between what your body looks like and how the ones on the internet appear. Whatever sexy is now, you don't feel it. Add a dose of having to do all the damn things all the damn time, and all of that might have settled into an ick that you just can't shift. So, you think, I've fundamentally changed. Sex is something I used to do, used to enjoy doing, not now. And perhaps you're right. Or maybe you're in your prime. Know more about your body, more about what it wants, what it doesn't. Know exactly where the spark to that rippling charge lives and how to ignite it. Maybe you've worked out that feeling sexual sits right alongside feeling wanted, appreciated, adored, desired. Maybe you're finally ready to feel that way. Maybe you don't give a fuck about your bumps and bulges and lines because you know that actually sexy has never been smooth, bland, clean. Maybe you're rediscovering how it feels to be in lust as a grown-up, when you truly know who you are. Maybe you're feeling, some days, exactly like that young woman you used to be. Maybe you're learning a new language of sexting and Pornhub and ordering in from the apps. Maybe you've finally thrown off the judgments from others, from yourself, that stopped you trying something that you had been whispering quietly inside for years. And now you're ready, and it's building, this confidence and this desire and this need, building to something you've heard women talking about and might just come pouring out in a roar. The sex of your life.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
I'll have what she's having.
Is it behind you, or is it ahead? Maybe the answer to that question has not yet been written. Hello and welcome to Mid, conversations for Gen X women who are anything but. My name is Holly Wainwright and I am midlife, mid-family, mid-identity crisis, and welcome back to our show, yours and mine. The whole point of Mid is to celebrate and commiserate and laugh and take the piss out of this life stage that the world tells us has made us small, irrelevant and invisible. Safe in the knowledge that actually we have never been wiser, more powerful, more experienced, and more ambitious for our next acts. Gen X has never played by the rules, so why would we start now? We're taking back that trite little word, the one that's meant to convince us of our mediocrity, and we're going to shake that mid shit up. In Season 1, We had 8 conversations that changed my mind and maybe my life a little bit about mental health and alcohol and bodies and grief and burnout and parenting kids who aren't kids and dating and everything really. And please feel free to scroll back in your feed and listen to any of those. They're not going anywhere. But today, in the first episode of Season 2, we're going somewhere we haven't been yet. We're going towards sex. I want you to meet Leslie Morgan. She's an American author, columnist, and advocate. She's been a successful corporate executive, she's a speaker on women's rights, and she's a survivor of domestic violence. She's got 3 grown-up kids. She is also 59 years old and very, very keen on sex. 10 years ago, Leslie's perfect on the outside, hollow on the inside marriage fell apart. She hadn't had sex for literally years when she decided that in her post-divorce life, she was going to find 5 boyfriends in 12 months. And she did. And she wrote a book about it called The Naked Truth. She met men, younger ones mostly, in all kinds of places, and she built herself a suite of lovers, including strangers, acquaintances, and an old high school crush. And she had a lot of sex. Most of it good, some of it great, a sprinkling of it absolutely mind-blowing. And Leslie changed. She rediscovered her sexuality, she embraced it, and she realised that what she needed in this second act of her life was not to be a caretaker any longer, but to be taken care of in all kinds of ways. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that this conversation is not for children, that you might want to put your earbuds in and you might want to do what I did before we recorded this interview and put on a little extra blush so that no one can see yours. Welcome to Mid, Season 2, Episode 1, Sex, with our guest, Leslie Morgan. Leslie, I want to start with this passage from your book. But before I tell you how I tracked down the 29-year-old explosives expert I met at the Philadelphia airport and how we blew up 2 decades of marriage and 36 months of celibacy, first I have to go back in time and tell you about getting rid of my husband, Marty. Please don't think I'm being callous. Trust me, my husband wanted to get rid of me too. Leslie, tell me everything about where you were in that moment.
So, it is really true that my husband had wanted to get rid of me for a long time. But he, like so many men, he wanted the trappings of having a wife. He liked the way that I organized his life and took care of the house and the kids and kind of made him look good and normal. And also, he very much saw our economic stability as something that he controlled, and he did not want to give me any money. So he had been making his peace with an unhappy marriage for a long time. And I think he would have lived with me without having sex with me for the rest of his life. And he would have just faked it and pretended. And I think that you see a lot of men like this. Women most often are the ones who initiate divorces, especially divorces after 40. And I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't sleep in the bed next to him anymore. I couldn't go on vacation with him anymore. I couldn't lie to my children. I couldn't lie to myself. So I had finally broken the news to him that our marriage was dead and that it wasn't his fault and it wasn't my fault. Although, Holly, I'll tell you the truth. I do think it was more his fault than my fault because I had tried very hard.
Yeah. When you talk about the scene where you were on holiday and you finally have this conversation and you try and hug him, you try and put your arms around him to comfort him, and he says, I don't like the way you hug me. And one of the things that I hear from a lot of women who've been in either sort of low sex, no sex, or just unhappy marriages is how that makes you feel to know that everything you're doing is sort of almost repulsive to them. It's not good for you, is it?
No, it was terrible. It was terrible to feel so repulsive and so much that I couldn't please him. For years after every time we had been intimate, he would kind of give me a grade and he would say, oh, no, not this time. You're still not meeting my needs.
Oh.
And it got to the point that one of the last times we attempted to have sex, I burst into tears. I was sobbing hysterically and shaking because I was so afraid of him destroying me again and making me feel terrible again. it was really quite something. And the thing that was even harder for me, maybe this would be easier for other women, but it was really hard for me, is that I loved sex and I had loved sex with him. Really loved it. I loved him physically. I don't know how graphic I'm allowed to get, but he was big and I really liked it. And it was sort of like having my own human dildo because he was so uninvolved in our sex life. But I enjoyed it. I made the most of it. I liked it.
I love that he was like a human dildo by that point because the emotional connection is...
The emotional connection, honestly, Holly, had never really been there. I mean, we had been in trouble from the very beginning of our marriage in terms of our sexual and our emotional connection. So I really thought that I never wanted to have sex again. He had made me feel so terribly about myself. And I thought that was the solution, to never have sex again, to divorce him, and to just be kind of blissfully alone for the rest of my life. And I told all of my friends that when we split up. I kind of shouted it from the rooftops that I was done with men and I was done with sex. And I was 49 years old. You know, I felt old, but now I realize I was actually quite young.
So you had kind of convinced yourself at that time that your sexual self, and you said you'd always really loved sex, was kind of done. And that's what I think lots of mid women tell themselves, right? Is they're like, I used to be a sexual person and now I'm not a sexual person anymore. And maybe that's just life. Maybe that's just age. Maybe that's just whatever. And often it's the relationship they're in that may have pushed them there. So you had 36 months of celibacy. The marriage had been sexless for a while, but for the reasons you've expressed.
Yes.
You're like, I'm never having sex again. And then we get to a place where you plan to have a year with 5 lovers. Tell me how that came about.
Okay. So I was exactly as you described. I thought that my sex life was over because I didn't like sex anymore. And what I really was coming to grips with was that it wasn't that I didn't like sex anymore. It was that I didn't want to have sex with my ex-husband ever again. And he had made me feel so terrible. And he had invested so little in our relationship that I didn't feel valued or treasured as a woman, as a sexual woman at all. And then I very serendipitously met maybe the most handsome man that I'd ever met, you know, outside of movie stars in an airport. I was 49 and he was 29, and I knocked over his coffee.
Did you knock over his coffee on accidental purpose, Leslie?
No, I didn't even see him. I knocked over his coffee and then I looked at him and I could barely breathe because he was so handsome. And we started a flirtation and we ended up rendezvousing in a hotel a month later, quite intentionally to break my celibacy streak. And it was one of the most daring, audacious things that I've ever done.
Where did you get the nerve to do that, right? Because, so this is the explosives expert that we began talking about at the beginning.
Yes.
I want to know, and we're going to go all kinds of places in this conversation, but one of the places we're going to get to towards the end, I hope, is your advice for how women can build their confidence to find themselves in situations like you did with explosives expert. How did you get the nerve to go from this person who'd almost had their sexuality decimated to be, I think that's the guy I'm going to break my celibacy streak with?
I really, honestly don't know. I think I was so happy to not be married. At that point, I had been unmarried for a year. I was coming back into my own. I was rediscovering myself. I was feeling great about myself because I just recovered from that terrible marriage. And I was feeling very gutsy. And that man was so handsome. He looked like Brad Pitt. He was so gorgeous. And I just thought, you know, I'm going to go back to who I was as a teenager. I'm going to become gutsy again, and I'm going to go after what I want. And I had been a very good girl as a married woman, as a wife. I had never strayed. I had never really even flirted with anybody. And here I am plotting to meet a man in a hotel for the sole purpose of having sex with him. I mean, it was so thrilling and it was terrifying. And I told no one. You know, I had one best friend who I confided that I thought I was going to do this, but I was kind of afraid to tell my other friends because I thought they might judge me. They might think that I was like some kind of crazy slut or something. But I did it. And as I write about in The Naked Truth, I was very nervous. It was terrifying to be naked in front of anybody, but especially a 29-year-old with a perfect body. And here's my body, I had breastfed my children, I had this flab on my stomach and I had cellulite everywhere. And I thought he was going to be disgusted and horrified. And instead he wasn't. He loved it. He loved the experience of being with an older woman. He was very appreciative. He made me feel great. The sex was not very good. I didn't care because it was just so delectable to be held again and to touch a man again and to have a man inside me and to just feel like a woman again. I felt like a sexual goddess. Oh. God, it was so intoxicating. And so what I did after that night, for various reasons, I couldn't continue with him. But I thought, you know what? I need more of this and I need a lot more. And I need to make sure I don't get too attached to any one of them. So I'm going to have 5.
How did you settle on 5, Leslie? Is it your lucky number or something?
It just seemed like a good number. I wanted 2 where I lived and then 3 on the road where I traveled. And it just 5 sounded like a good number. And you know what, Holly? It was very rarely 5. There were times where it was 0. There were times where I had like 10 people that I was working on. It was
working on. I like it.
Because you don't just wake up one day at any age and say, I'm going to have 5 boyfriends tomorrow. You have to reach out and cultivate them and meet them and convince them. And it was a lot of work, actually. But it was really, really fun.
Fun work after, everything you've been doing for a lot of years, not being about you, but being about other people. Can I just ask you, push on that younger man thing a little bit, right? Because this is something I hear a lot from the mid community and my mid friends. You might be coming out of this long-term relationship where only one person has seen you naked for all this time. And as you just expressed, there's a lot of fear there. Your body in your mind looks very different to the last time you showed it to a stranger, right?
Right.
And a lot of my friends of our age say that younger men, it's very common for them to have their first post-marriage sexual experiences or several with younger guys. And that younger guys, as you just expressed, don't give a stuff about the cellulite, the boobs being a little lower than they were. Why do you think that is? What's your sort of theory on why younger guys love older women and why older women need to shrug off some of the fear of like, I couldn't show this to them?
So I think that younger men who are sexually attracted to older women, they don't expect perfection. They absolutely know that your body's not going to be perfect. They're after the entire experience, not just the physicality of it. And they are fully aware that older women are much more experienced sexually than they are, and they like that. And also, by comparison to these men, I was so wise. I knew how to put them at ease. I was very comfortable talking to them about sex because I'd had a lot of sex and because I liked sex. And also I could solve their problems. I mean, there is not a 29-year-old on earth who can come up with a problem that I can't solve in 5 minutes because they don't have real problems, from my perspective.
Yeah, right. Yes.
And they appreciated the whole package. They also appreciated being taken care of. They appreciated that I lived in a nice house, much nicer than what the whole package, Holly. And I was shocked by it. When I had first gotten together with Dylan, he had to explain to me what a MILF was. I did not know that there was such a term. I didn't know that younger men liked older women. I had been living with my married mother, blinders on. And so it was all quite an awakening for me.
So look, you decide you want a lover or 5 lovers, but how do you even start to make that a reality? We'll be back with more after this break. So the strategy is set. We're going to find 5 boyfriends in the year to break the drought and to plunge back into the boyfriend pool. I know that you didn't use dating apps. How did you find your boyfriends? You were just saying it was a bit of work. Obviously, you've got kids. At this point, I think your kids teenagers?
Yes, 2 of my kids were living away from home. One was in college, one was in boarding school, and the other was only with me a week at a time because then she would go to her dad's house.
So you've got windows of opportunity. You travel for work. So there's airports, there's hotels, there's all those things sort of sprinkled through that. So how did you find your 5 boyfriends?
Well, the first thing I started just looking at the world completely differently because you don't need dating apps because there are actually so many men everywhere. And I started seeing that there were men on the street, there were men at the supermarket, there were men at yoga class, there were men in airports, there were men at the car wash. I started seeing men, and I started really pushing myself. When I saw a man who I thought I was attracted to, I forced myself to talk to him. And it was really hard. I was not raised to be this way. I was raised to wait for men to come to me. But I forced myself, and I missed out on some really good men because I wasn't gutsy enough. And I also made a fool out of myself with some men who really were not interested. But in general, I had a pretty good hit rate. And I met one man in yoga. Oh, he was so cute. God, I loved him. Gorgeous yoga man. I met a lot of men in airports because airports were the best place. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. It was like going to a bar. Because there's so many men in airports and they're so easy to meet. A lot of men travel for business and you can just meet them by saying, well, where are you going? Where do you live? Oh, the flight's delayed again. I found it to be extremely easy.
So what you're telling us is don't go to the airport in your sweatpants.
Oh, no. I started dressing up so much for the airport. You have to dress nicely. I mean, I didn't want to be too fancy, but I tried to look hot.
Of course. And then you're literally starting conversations with men. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, so things end with Dylan for various reasons. Then the other relationships as we go through the book, and we'll get to Jake towards the end, which is a really interesting story. It is a lot of work. It's a lot of emotional work as well as other kinds of work in terms of you're getting amazing sex, but these are also sort of relationships that need nurturing, aren't they? Was that part of it?
In some ways, the work really was on myself to force myself to be more aggressive, to be more proactive, and to make sure that I didn't get too attached to any of them. Because I think I could have quite easily gotten attached to them, and that would have been a disaster. It's much easier emotionally if you're not that attached. And I have to tell you, I'm so humiliated to admit this, but this is something that middle-aged men have understood for a very long time. That after you get divorced, you date a lot of people, you don't get attached to any of them. You just try them all out. And then if you feel like it, you settle down with one. I was doing the exact same thing, but I had never been raised to do that. I didn't know women could do that. And so the trick was to find the men, to approach the men, and to convince the men. And the men took a lot of convincing, believe it or not. And I don't really understand why. I think they couldn't believe it, that this woman was being so forward. And I made it quite clear to them pretty early on that I was not interested in a committed relationship. I didn't want them to take me out to dinner, and I wanted them to come to my house and have sex. That's what I wanted. And once they got that, most of them were fine with it. There's still, to my surprise, there's still a few who said no. That's not what they wanted. They wanted a relationship. But the next one after Dylan, it was a man I met for work. He was in his 20s, really hot again, and very adventurous sexually. And he had always liked older women. So that happened very quickly and easily. And then, as I write in the book, after we had had this afternoon of glorious, adventurous sex of all kinds, I had to take my daughter to a sporting event. And while I was watching her play sports, he texted me that said, that was great, but it has to be a one-time thing because I have a girlfriend. And, if I had been dating him, if I had gone on a dating app and had made myself vulnerable and all of that, I would have been furious and really hurt. But because this was just casual, I just laughed. I couldn't have cared less. And also I knew he'd be back, and he was back. It was sort of light and breezy. And I'd never approached dating that way. I'd never approached dating as a buffet.
Yeah, right.
That I could say, I want that, I want that, I want that. I bought this kind of societal BS that as a woman, you need to find one man, as if you find one food that you want to eat for the rest of your life. And that's the only food you can ever have. That's what I thought. Like, no wonder it hadn't worked. No wonder I'd had 2 failed marriages. My approach was just completely wrong. And it was much easier when I took it all a little more lightheartedly and not seriously.
It's so interesting that you say that some of the men needed convincing because I guess in the cultural norms we've all agreed upon, they don't believe you when you're saying, I don't want a relationship. They're like, but women always want relationships, don't they? And one of the wonderful things about midlife is that I see younger women who are rushing to choose a life partner. And that's a very different game than, as you say, choosing from the buffet of experiences I want to have. So were you thinking when you were choosing your boyfriends or going through this, I've never done XYZ in bed, or I've never slept with a guy who XYZ. Was that part of it? Like going back to what do I really want and what do I want to try and what have I never done? Was that part of the excitement of it?
It was like getting out of jail in a way, because the jail that I had been in, that a lot of women are in, is that I thought I need to pick a partner. He needs to be a stable person. He needs to be a good provider. He needs to be a good dad. I'd been very focused on that since my late teenage years. And what I discovered at age 49, already having had my kids, having very little desire to get married again, was that the world opened up to me, that I could date men who were 10 years older, 20 years younger. I could date men of different ethnicities. I could date men of different religions. I could date men who I had very little in common with because they weren't going to be my partners. So all of a sudden, every man on the street was fair game as long as I liked him. And I think another reason that the men took some convincing is that I don't like slimy men. I don't like men who just want to have sex. I wanted men who had more substance to them and who I actually liked. I've never had a true one-night stand in my life. I needed there to be something more there. And the men I picked knew that too. So it just took them a while to figure out, like, well, this woman is interested in me, but she really, truly only wants a casual relationship. And also, I think that some of them at the beginning thought I was crazy. They're like, there's no way this can be true. And so I would have to really convince them, no, we're not going to talk about who else you're seeing. We're not going to talk about your girlfriend. We're not going to talk about what you've got going on. I'm not going to talk about that either. We're going to see each other when we feel like it, and we're going to have a great time, and there are no strings attached for me or you. It was just a very different paradigm.
And you've just talked about some of the boundaries. We're not talking about other people. What other boundaries did you have in place to make sure that these relationships didn't get too messy? I also just wanted to ask if you're ever worried about your safety. It sounds like you vetted them pretty well in a way, like in terms of you got to know them a little bit and you've got a good radar for this, having had an abusive marriage yourself.
It's true. I never felt unsafe. I had a list of things that I needed in these guys. They had to think I was really hot. I had to think they were hot. They had to be fun and they had to be nice. So, it's a relatively short list, but it got me through so that these were people who I felt safe with. I really liked dating younger men because they didn't want a relationship with an older woman. They wanted an experiment and to have some fun. But there weren't any 29-year-olds who really wanted to settle down with a woman who was past her childbearing years. So that worked for me fine. The boundaries, I think, were very easy to negotiate because I think men are actually much, much better with boundaries than women are. And so once I was able to convince them that I wasn't crazy and that this was all I wanted is, to see them occasionally and have a wonderful time in bed, they got with the program really fast.
What about sexual boundaries? You've said you wanted to try all kinds of things that you hadn't tried, or not necessarily that you hadn't tried, but that you certainly weren't getting in your marriage necessarily. Was it a wonderful experience to try all these things and then pick, I love that, I don't love that, this is what I want to do? What was that like?
Yes, it was magnificent. It was mostly magnificent, not because of the experimenting, not because of the new positions or the new things we did, but just because I was seeking adoration from so many men at once. So for once in my life, I felt like I was getting inundated with men who thought I was fantastic, not just sexually, but in every way. Like I was like a goddess to them. And that was exactly what I needed. I think it's what every woman needs a lot of. And I just felt exhilarated that I was getting it. And there were a few, failures, men who I didn't really click with sexually. But that was, easy to not repeat. And the men who I had long-term, more than a few times sexual relationships with, it was incredible because we got to know each other really well sexually. Kind words were exchanged. There was one man who told me over and over again, he still tells me that he loves me. I think he really does, even though he didn't want to be in a committed relationship. It was real love. So that was absolutely lovely and wonderful. And yes, we did do things that, there was a lot of oral sex involved. I had had anal sex when I was a teenager because I had a very experimental boyfriend. I was very fortunate. But he, honestly, this will make you laugh, he didn't know that you were supposed to use lubrication for anal sex.
Oh.
So it had really hurt.
And that would have put you off?
But then I was like, you know what? I want to try that again. And we'll use a lot of lube this time. And, there was a lot of fun like that. Having sex outdoors, having sex in the middle of the day, having a man drive 2.5 hours to have sex with me in the 2-hour window that I had that day. It was all thrilling and it made me feel good. And you know what? I wanted to say one other thing about boundaries that you asked about. I did have some rules that I think it's important to think about if you're going to embark on this kind of adventure. I never, and I mean never, even flirted with somebody whose wife or former wife I knew.
You're right.
Never. I didn't like needy men. And I did not like men with young children. I felt too bad about it. I needed men who really were unencumbered and who were free and who were not cheating liars.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily your business if they are in another relationship, but you're certainly not husband hunting at the school parent-teacher night. That's not what that's not what we're doing here.
I couldn't have done that. That would have been so awful. And I dated a lot of men who were in the process of separating and getting divorced. And I didn't ask many questions about that either.
Yeah.
Because again, I felt like that's not my business, your business.
Leslie, I just want to tell you how refreshing and wonderful it was to hear you say, I wanted to be adored, and every woman needs that sometimes, because you know what? I think that we are told all the time, like, who do you think you are? You know what I mean? Who do you think you are? Why should you be treated that well? Like, it's a very bold thing for a woman to say. I wanted to be treated like a goddess. I wanted them to worship me. I needed that to help put myself back together or just to feel like me again. Did you cop judgment from people in your life for doing something so unashamedly positively you focused?
No. I think that women saw what I was doing, and the only negative thing is they might have been a little bit envious of it. A lot of other women had done what I did, but not so publicly. And they came and quietly told me to keep going, that they were still doing it. And also men really loved it. Men responded very positively. But I just want to unpack what you just said about the fact that we women are raised to be ashamed of thinking that we deserve a lot of that goddess adoration. And the reason we are taught that is because it's a lot easier for men if they don't have to adore us and they don't have to seduce us. And they have set it up so that we think we don't deserve it. We don't deserve the flowers and the compliments. And the science, unfortunately, is not in men's favor, because the science is that what is an aphrodisiac for women sexually is to be seduced, to be chaste, to be treated like a goddess. And it is the thing that goes out the window almost immediately in most marriages. Most men think, I don't have to do that anymore.
Yep.
She's here. She's in the bed with me. I can have sex with her whenever I want. I don't even have to be nice to her, and she has to have sex with me. And in some countries, it's literally true. You're obligated to have sex with your husband. But even in progressive democracies where women have rights, men very much think that they don't have to seduce women anymore. I say to men and to women all the time, if you're married and your wife doesn't want to have sex with you, it's your fault. It's not her fault. It's because you have stopped trying to seduce her.
Amen, Leslie.
I know.
Amen. And you know what? There would be people who listen to this and would say, oh, you're not even allowed to seduce a woman anymore. Like, you're not even allowed to say it. But one of the things I very much heard and understood from you when you said, I don't like slimy men, I don't like creepy men. Women have a very good radar for when a man is sexually harassing them in an inappropriate way, or when this is a positive exchange that we're both into. Like, women know that difference. Wouldn't you agree?
It's true, but it's because we've been dealing with it since we were 8 years old. And we understand what is an aggressive, slimy come on, and what is really a man who appreciates us and who, almost more importantly, is a man who loves women. I mean, those are the type of men I look for, are the men who have gone through their whole life thinking women are fantastic and they're very lucky to be a man, and that women, we smell good, we taste good, we're soft, we're gentle, we're wonderful. That's the kind of man that I'm looking for. I don't want that man who wants to corner me and force me to do something I don't want to do. I've dealt with enough of that. It terrifies me. It's terrified me since I was a very young girl, with good reason. And most women are like that.
I couldn't agree more. After the break, Leslie takes us through what happened when she actually fell in love again. Let's get to Jake. You did know Jake. He was not a stranger from an airport. He was from your school days.
I'm just going to get so sad, even though it's been
Oh.
so long. To me, it's such a sad story. So Jake, I had dated him when I was in high school. He was 2 years younger than me in high school, but we had a lot in common. He was also a writer. He was a wonderful, wonderful young man when I was 18 and he was 16. And we had had a kind of ill-fated romance because he was just too young and I was kind of dealing with a lot of problems in my family and other distractions. And so we had dated only for a few months, and he had thought he was going to lose his virginity to me, and he was very, very sad that he hadn't. So he had always held a candle, a torch for me, and we had stayed friends for a long time, for over 20 years. We both became successful writers. We would talk several times a year. And I had met every girlfriend he'd ever had, and I thought they were all that he was punching below his weight. And so we reunited. He had had a book published, and he'd come to my town, and I went to the book reading, and I was very happy for him. And then, to my shock, he rang my doorbell later that night. And I hadn't been expecting him, and it was incredibly romantic. He told me he had been waiting for me forever, and we had sex in every room of my house that night, on every piece of furniture, like we really made up for lost time. And it was really unbelievably romantic. Eventually, he convinced me to get rid of all the other boyfriends and to just be with him. And he seduced me with his letters. He wrote me the most beautiful letters in the world, and they're all in The Naked Truth. I got his permission to reprint them. And I fell so deeply in love with him. And I tell you, there is nothing like the first person you fall in love with after the end of a long, unhappy marriage. I just was very vulnerable. He made me feel beautiful and sexy and cherished and, really like he'd been waiting decades for me. And he was quite a magnificent man. He was really handsome, really fit. He'd never been married. He didn't have kids, wickedly funny and unbelievable in the sack. I mean, made me scream with pleasure in ways that I never had before. And it was a two-way street too. We were very, very compatible sexually. We couldn't keep our hands off each other, even in public. It was really an intoxicating relationship. It's the kind of relationship a lot of people have in their teens or 20s. And here we're having it in our early 50s. And I started writing The Naked Truth when I was still with him.
And he knew about that.
Oh, he knew all about it.
And he knew about it at the time too.
Yes, he knew I was writing about him, and he knew that I had had all these lovers. He was very supportive of it. And the plot was going to be, after my 5 lovers, then I found my one true love. And the day I signed the book contract for The Naked Truth, we broke up. And I was devastated. He broke up with me, and I was devastated by the ways that he did it and what I eventually learned he'd been doing. But the writer in me, Holly,
oh gosh,
thought,
rubbed your hands together.
Okay, the ending just got so much better, so much more real. Because men are not the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. They are not. There is no Prince Charming.
Yes.
That mythology has gotten all of us in so much trouble. And it's not fair to men either, because they don't want to be Prince Charming. It's a big burden to put on them. And so I knew that the book had just gotten so much more raw.
Oh, Leslie, yes. Because not in any way to discount your heartbreak, which is very real. And in the book, I mean, it's really difficult because you can see how painful that was. But in a way, if the book had ended that way, it would have been a little bit predictable, maybe. Oh, not predictable, but like a bit too tidy.
And I would have sold out the sisterhood because it doesn't end like that. It never ends in happily ever after. And what I want to say now, it's 10 years later, and I'm going to turn 60 next year, and I'm looking at true old age. People always say to me, aren't you afraid, you're going to die alone? And what I have to say is, you know what? We are all going to die alone. We are all going to die alone. Everybody knows this. And have you met a man who is capable of taking care of a woman, a dying woman, an aged woman? Older men, they don't put in their hearing aids. They're terrible at advocating for anybody. They don't like hospitals. They don't like best. There's no way on earth a man is going to take care of us. I'm sorry to tell everybody listening to it, but I'm actually happy to tell you this because it's true. You're going to take care of you. And the people who are going to be there for you are your best friends, male and female, the healthcare system, and your children if you have them. That's who's going to take care of you. It's not going to be a man. There's no happily ever after. And men think that women are going to take care of them, and they're right. because we've been conditioned our whole life to do it. I'm not going to do it. And I would urge you to think about not doing it, because there are a lot better things to do with your life than take care of a man who would never take care of you anyway.
Leslie.
But anyway, I digress.
I love that rant. We've just had a rash of people at Mamma Mia, where I work, and we're writing, women talking about the men who've left them after serious diagnoses. It is a shockingly common thing that happens. Anyway, we do digress. I want to go back to one thing about Jake. That story is heartbreaking, but you know what is very common in midlife when you are going through a divorce is to either fantasize about or act on going back to a high school or an early adult relationship, right? Because it's almost like reconnecting with who you were then. And it's so beautiful the way you talk about that, because for a while there, it was like that. You were, as you said, making up for lost time, having this insane connection that felt like teenage love again. But it didn't play out that way. And very often these relationships don't. Am I right?
It's so true. And I say, beware the fantasy. I am one of the best fantasizers ever born. And I can make something out of nothing. And what I did with Jake is I thought I knew him because I had known him as a teenager. And a lot had happened in the time between them. And I hadn't really known him as a teenager either. I really hadn't. We hadn't dated for long enough. So I thought I knew him, and I made up this story in my head about who he was, what our love was, that he hadn't married anybody because he had been waiting for me, that I was his one true love. That's why he'd been unhappy in other relationships. It's why he cheated on every girlfriend he'd ever had. It was because that girlfriend wasn't me. And I ignored so many red flags. Yeah. This is one of my favorite red flags. The first gift that Jake ever gave me is he gave me a book by a very famous writer, and it's called This Is How You Lose Her. And it is the story of a man who reconnects with a girlfriend, and he loses her by cheating on her with hundreds of women. And that is what Jake did to me. When we broke up, he'd accused me of cheating on him. And he had broken into my computer and into my phone, and he had been essentially spying on me for months. At the same time, he was cheating on me. And it was absolutely devastating. I did not stop crying for about 6 months. And it was so humiliating, embarrassing. Yeah. Here I am, this mom, taking care of these kids with a great career, and I cannot go to the supermarket without a box of tissues. And I'm not exaggerating. Oh. And it's only now, almost 10 years later, that I can not cry about it and also just acknowledge what a horrible person he was, and that everybody could see it except for me, and that I just made up a personality for him, and I fell in love with a fantasy. And I just want to warn everybody listening, please don't do that. Yeah. Please don't do that. It's really dangerous and horrible. And I'm really lucky I didn't marry him, that I didn't give all my money to him, that I didn't alienate my kids over him. I'm so lucky that he was so fucked up, that he broke up with me at that point and moved on with the woman who he was having an affair with. I'm so incredibly fortunate. I didn't feel that way at the time, but now I'm so grateful that it happened that way.
It's interesting because one of the things about midlife is that we think we're very wise, and we are. You know, we've been through a lot of things, but we are still as capable as we were when we were young of wanting to believe something so much, you know, just wanting to,
so good.
Ignoring all the things that we have learnt and just jumping in. Anyway, before we move on to just how life is now for you, and we won't go through all of these because I want people to read your wonderful book, Naked Truth. It is a great read too. It's a rollicking page-turner read. I love it. But at the end, you kind of give a little cheat sheet to women who might be not necessarily going, I want to have 5 boyfriends, but who are rediscovering their sexual self, their romantic self. And we've touched on them a little bit when we were talking about airports, but I wanted to just ask you about the best advice you would give a woman who's listening to this, who's thinking maybe her self-confidence has been destroyed by a marriage or a long relationship or whatever, and she wants to rediscover herself. You say, go out solo as much as possible.
It is really true. Go out by yourself. You're much more approachable when you travel by yourself. Go out to the movies by yourself, go out to a restaurant, walk, exercise, all of the stuff. Go out by yourself. That's really important. Also, some of these things are so easy. Smile at everybody. Smiling is really sexy and approachable. And also smile at the women, because you need more female friends too. Just smile at everybody. And if you think somebody's slimy or they're, you know, getting a little too enthusiastic too fast, then run away. But you're not going to do any harm by smiling at everybody. I also think every time I leave the house, even if I'm just taking out the trash, I look in the mirror And I do something to make myself feel like I'm my best self. Maybe I'll put on lipstick or eyeliner, or take out the trash in my high-heeled cowboy boots a lot. And it's because I want to strut. I want to feel like I'm strut worthy. And it's not the boots, it's the attitude. If you are walking down the street like that, you look confident and you attract attention and you are your best self.
On that, because I loved this one, and it might be a bit surprising to people who, are thinking about you putting your lipstick on as you go to take the trash out. But I love this. You say, be transparent. Wear as little makeup as possible. So this isn't about the lipstick. It's about don't disguise who you are or how old you are. It doesn't work. That's really refreshing. That's also some confidence right there, because I think it's so deeply ingrained in us that our wrinkles are ugly, our saggy bits are ugly, put as much makeup on as you can to cover that shit up. Do as many things as you can to try and still look like 34-year-old you. But your experience is that no, don't do that.
Right.
Tell me why.
So, there are so many tropes that women are taught from the time that we're very young that you just have to throw all of them out. And one of them is that after a certain age, you're invisible to men, that men don't notice women. And it's just not true. Men are very visual and very physical, and they are going to notice us until the day we die. And some people want to be invisible, and that's so great. So go and be invisible. I don't want to be invisible, and I think that honestly, most people don't. And so it's part of being transparent is saying, hey, I'm here. I'm here and I like attention and I want attention. And I'm going to give you attention too, because I'm going to meet your eyes. I'm going to look into your eyes. I'm going to smile at you. I don't know if this only happens in Washington, D.C., my hometown, but I have gotten so many marriage proposals just walking down the street. Like a guy will lean out his car window and say, hey, baby, you want to marry me?
It's your vibe, Leslie. It's your vibe.
I don't ignore them. I stop in my tracks. I start laughing and I say, sure. And most of them keep driving, but it's just the attitude. It's like, I appreciate men. I love men. Even though they've broken my heart so many times, I still really like men, and I try to lead with that. So I don't try to cover up my wrinkles. I have a lot of them. I have a lot of saggy parts. I would say, though, that there are a few things that women don't necessarily think about. And one of them, and I'm going to get very superficial here, your hair really matters.
Oh.
Hair is really sexy. Don't cut your hair really short unless that's what you like.
Yeah.
We're told that and once you have kids, you can't have long hair anymore. Or once you're over 50, you can't have long hair. Grow your hair however you want and dress however you wear. I wear the shortest skirts that you've ever seen.
Oh, I love
and my
it.
cellulite shows through it. And I don't care. You do you. And just say, forget about it with all the rules. Do what makes you feel good inside.
I absolutely love that. It sounds like you are living the absolute dream for a lot of women. Can I ask you, though, and I know you've written about this before, how important economic independence is in that picture, right? Because there may be a lot of women listening to this whose marriages or relationships might not be perfect, but they're thinking, well, I couldn't do that. I couldn't live without them financially. Do you think we don't put enough stock in planning for that?
That is the linchpin of my freedom, is that I'm economically independent. And it's what I would say to any woman listening, no matter what age you are. Invest in yourself, your education, your work, and your bank account. Because if I had not done that, and if I didn't stand up for myself in my divorce from my second husband, stand up for myself financially, I wouldn't have the economic freedom that I have. And Holly, I would have had to get married again. I would have had to. So many women are forced into marriages in their 50s that might not necessarily be what they want to do. And then they're forced into being caretakers. So guard your financial independence. That is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It is the literal pot of gold because it allows me to live on my own and to travel and to see my children and to take care of my children and to do everything that I want to do. Of all the mythologies that women are sold, the fact that we do not tell women how important it is to be economically independent is the most dangerous of those myths. That money doesn't matter, that economics don't matter, and that you shouldn't fight for yourself financially, whether it's fighting for a raise or fighting for a settlement in divorce. Hogwash. You need to stand up for yourself, and you need to encourage your female friends to fight for themselves too, to ask for a raise, to ask for a better job, And when they're brokenhearted and they're thinking they might lose custody of their children if they don't cave financially, tell them to stand up for themselves. You cannot be free and happy if you're not economically independent. You just can't.
Look, the naked truth, this adventure, as you say, is almost 10 years ago. How have your 50s been sexually and relationship-wise? How's life been since the 5 boyfriends, Leslie?
So I could write quite a sequel.
I bet you can.
It took me a long time to recover from Jake. But once I did, I started dating again. And I did the same thing again, although I was looking for a partner for a while. I dated older men, which I had never done. I had sex with older men.
How is that? How are older men? We're not hearing a lot of women saying, I want to date an older man once they're in their 50s. Tell me how that was.
Okay. I have to tell you the terrible truth is that I hated it. I hated it. I pushed myself to do it because I just thought, well, maybe I'm missing something. I found that older men were so sexist and they just expected even more than my own ex-husband. They expected me to be very traditional and they weren't any good in bed. They didn't think they had to be. And they, this is so terrible to say, they were really bony and I didn't like it. I mean, I'm sorry. I'd been with 29-year-olds. I couldn't be with 69-year-olds. I just couldn't.
I get it.
So that was a short experiment. I started dating another old friend who I dated off and on for 3 years. I thought I was going to marry him. He was so wonderful and so lovely. He knew my kids. I knew his kids. I knew both of his ex-wives. I liked them. There was a lot that was right, but it wasn't quite right enough. And it turned out that he was very possessive and insecure. And it just took a long time to get at the heart of that. And once I figured that out, I wasn't interested in him anymore. So now I'm back to kind of the naked truth thing where I am dating a couple of different guys. I am having the best sex of my life. I'm so happy that I can say this to you, Holly. I found somebody who's even better in bed than Jake. And I'm so happy about that. I thought that was never going to happen. And maybe I can see the finish line here because there are fewer and fewer men. The numbers start to work against us as we get older. And there's a feeding frenzy anytime an attractive man comes on the market. And I just hate it. I don't want to have to work that hard. I don't have to compete with other women because I love other women and I don't want to compete with them. So I really am at a point where I've accepted that I'm not going to get married again. It would be very unusual if I were to get married again. And that I might not ever have a full-time monogamous committed relationship. For 2 reasons. There aren't as many men out there anymore. And also, I don't want it. I treasure my alone time. I have 3 adult children and I want to be able to go visit them at the drop of a hat. I don't want any man on earth saying that I have to cook them dinner every night and that I can't go visit my kids when I want to. I can't ride horses when I want to. I can't do all the crazy things. You know, I travel a lot. I spent a month and a half in Rome this year. Last year, I went to Madrid 3 times. Like, I don't want anybody controlling me. And I've invested in myself in every way, in my self-esteem, in my economic independence, and in my lifestyle. So I can do whatever the hell I want. And I'm doing it. And I just encourage everybody, if this is what you want, if you want to be with a lovely man and take care of him for the rest of your life, please go do that if that's what makes you happy. It never made me happy and it is never going to make me happy. And so I just can't fantasize that that's going to happen because it's really probably not.
Oh, I love this. Again, so many tropes of like, this is what happiness looks like. You've got to find the person. Like, happiness looks all kinds of ways. And my God, your life at 59 sounds bloody brilliant. I just need to go back to best sex of my life because obviously we've talked about this a bit in this whole conversation, but a lot of women who've talked themselves out of the fact that they're sexual creatures once they hit maybe menopause or perimenopause, they sort of think, oh, well, that part of my life is over. Please just tell me a little bit more about how you can be having the best sex of your life at our age, because I love that.
Okay. So I think it is true that some women, after menopause, the vagina thins, sex becomes painful. They don't want to have sex. I would tell you, Holly, every woman I talk to who doesn't want to have sex, what she really is saying is she doesn't want to have sex with her husband anymore. And she's happy for an excuse to not have sex with him. There are things that you can do even if sex becomes painful. There are so many things. There are a million creams and suppositories and supplements you can take, and you just have to try until you find the one that's right. And I've had a lot of really hilariously, embarrassingly frank conversations with my doctors and gynecologists. Like, I've had to put my fingers inside myself and say, this is where it hurts. And then they'll say, oh, okay, well, this is what you need. This is what you need. And you can have, both Jake and the current best sex ever guy, those were people who I started having sex with after I turned 50.
Mm-hmm.
And the other great, great, great lover was that guy who introduced me to lubricationless anal sex.
Mm.
Besides that, he was off the charts, adventurous, comfortable in his body, curious about my body. I've had so much incredible sex. And I'm not like a nymphomaniac. As I said earlier, I've never had a one-night stand. I like pretty vanilla sex, but I like it to be really good, and I like to have a lot of it. And I'm really, really lucky. And I think the key to having great sex is to like your body, to masturbate, to figure out what you like, and then to be just really open with your partners about what you like. And that's what, after my second marriage ended, I vowed that the first time I had sex with anybody else, I was going to tell them the top 3 things I like. They're very straightforward. They're easy to do. And I found that men really liked it. They want to please their partner. They want to know exactly what to do. And it's not like I gave a tutorial, but I just gave them some tips. Everybody's body is different. This is what I like.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know what you like. And it worked. One of the blessings of the Naked Truth, which is a lot of sex in it, is that I now talk to all of my girlfriends and all of my male friends about sex in a very candid way that I never did before. And it's a little bit hard to do depending on the culture that you were brought up in, but you can learn a lot by talking to women about what they like and what they do. And my male friends, I've had some great, great sexual conversations with my male friends. There's a lot to talk about.
There is, and it's that thing of not being ashamed or afraid to talk about it. I know you might go to the doctor and say, oh, my libido's, lessening in menopause, and they'll be like, is that a problem for you? And you're like, am I allowed to say yes? Yes, that's a problem for me. Look, this has been the most amazing conversation, Leslie. I can't thank you enough for sharing your story. Your book, The Naked Truth, is brilliant. As your other books, I've seen you talk about crazy love, completely different topics, so important. We'll put a link to all of that in our show notes today. But Leslie, my gosh, thank you for being you and telling it like it is.
Well, it's a pleasure and a delight. I love being a woman. I feel so lucky to be a woman. I love being body positive and sex positive. And it's been a long journey to get here, Holly. I wasn't born this way. I had to fight to feel good about myself and to feel good about my flabby, saggy body and to enjoy life. And I think every woman deserves that, to be cherished, to feel like you're a sexual being and you can enjoy sex and that you're really valued by every single person in your life who loves you. It's the way that it should be. And too often we get messages that we should settle for much less, and we just shouldn't. We shouldn't. Life is too wonderful to settle for less.
Amen. Well, look, my life right now couldn't be more different from Leslie's, and yet I loved that conversation. Her book, The Naked Truth, and her others are available at the link in the show notes, and I have to tell you, The Naked Truth is really fun. It is written in a really accessible, fun style, and you might kind of love it. I know what she talks about is bold. It's bold that Leslie is so upfront about how she feels about men, both good and bad. I think the very specific descriptions she gives of the way desire dies in a long-term relationship are very, very relatable for a lot of women in relationships with men. And I'd love to know if the dynamic is comparable in non-straight relationships. I promise we'll get to that conversation too. I also loved what she said about money and financial independence, and we're also going to be talking about that very soon. I know it's bold that Leslie says the best version of midlife might just be a predominantly solo one, which certainly wouldn't be true or possible for many. And how to thrive in long-term relationships is another discussion we're cooking up for you. But for me, her unapologetic insistence on what she deserves, on what all women deserve, was just energizing as hell. As I said at the beginning, sex can be attached to so much sadness and shame. There's something so uplifting about and refreshing about hearing a midlife woman just being so honest about what she wants and what she needs. Over the next 7 episodes, you're going to be hearing more honest conversations, some with names you'll definitely know, some that won't be familiar, but their stories will stay with you, I promise. About money, about the sandwich generation, about rage, invisibility, family, and a lot more, and I can't wait for you to hear them. Follow us, review us, rate us, come back for more. Massive thanks to you for supporting Mid and to our amazing team, our executive producer Naima Brown and audio producer Tom Lyon. We'll see you next week.